Hey, good evening, Castlers. LFO7 here again. So we covered the first game ever played between Ydtd and Warpathhunter in daily time control. This evening we will cover the second time these two faced each other in their careers under the same time control. The second game also took place in the Happy New Year tournament. It was completed on January 3rd of this year. This time it's Ydtd with white and Warpathhunter with black. Ydtd starts out with pawn to d4. And I know Ydtd had to be seething and wanted retribution for losing to the orangutan. Warpath responded with d5. Pawn to c4 was played. Ydtd went to his beloved queen's gambit opening. Pawn to e6. Warpath declined the gambit. e3. These are all conventional moves right now. Warpath develops his kingside knight. Bishop to d3, pawn to c5, knight f3, Ydtd developing his kingside knight and possibly looking to castle early. Bishop to d6. And you get a kingside castle from TD. Knight to c6, c takes d5, e takes d5, d takes c5, and then bishop b8. Not sure why Warpath did not recapture that c5 pawn with the bishop. That was the best move. As a result, he now trails by a pawn. Ydtd continues with pawn to a3, queen to e7 attacks the unguarded c5 pawn. Pawn to b4 adds protection to it. Kingside castle from Warpath. Bishop to b2, bishop g4 pins the knight to the queen. Knight b to d2. Pawn to d4 from Warpath is a mistake, because he just gives away his hanging d4 pawn with e takes d4. And early on, this does not look like the same Warpath that lumped up Ydtd in the last game. He seems a bit off his game. Ydtd now leads by 2 pawns and should feel pretty comfy with this position. Queen to d8 is played by Warpath. Knight to b3, bishop to h5. Pawn to b5 kicks the knight to e7. Rook e1, TD takes an open file with his rook. Knight to g6, knight b to d2. Knight f4 hits the hanging bishop on d3. Queen c2 defends it. Queen d7, knight e5 attacks the queen. Warpath moves his queen to d5, threatening mate on the g2 square. So TD moves his bishop to f1 to prevent that. Bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, equal trade, but now the rook is aiming at the queen on d5. Queen d7 moves it to safety. Rook a e1, TD doubles up his rooks on the e file. Rook a e8. Pawn to c6 attacks the queen. B takes c6, b takes c6, equal trade of pawns. Queen to g4 moves the queen to safety, king h1. Queen to c8, Warpath retreats to regroup. Pawn to a4 from TD, knight 6 to d5. Bishop a3 hits the boxed-in rook on f8. Excellent move. But Warpath plays pawn to f6, attacking TD's rook as well. Nice counter. Rook takes e8, rook takes e8, rook takes e8 check. Bishop takes e8. And it was good that Warpath recaptured with the bishop. You don't want to recapture with the queen like so, because then Ydtd will start moving that pawn to promotion. And I know all about that because he did it to me in a prior tournament. He will run that pawn down your throat or cram it where the sun doesn't shine. So Warpath Rich, I keep calling him Warpath Rich, I apologize. He changed it to Warpathhunter. By Warpathhunter recapturing with his bishop, like so, he keeps the pawn at bay, and he now has 2 pieces attacking the potential promoting pawn. The queen on c8 and the f8 bishop. Good job. Let's continue. So, queen c5 is played by TD. Bishop takes c6, wins material, and gets rid of the troublesome pawn for Warpath. TD snags the hanging pawn on a7. Equal trade of pawns. Queen to e8, the orangutan going after the a4 pawn now. Queen to c5, knight e6 is played, but the computer felt he should have taken that pawn on a4. Queen to c4, queen a8, Warpath still looking to win the a4 pawn. Pawn to a5, TD pushes the pawn. Pawn to f5, ooh, and Warpath missed an opportunity to even up this game. Instead of pawn to f5, let's bring that back. If he plays knight d to f4, you get pawn to f3, queen takes a5, queen takes c6, queen takes a3, g3, and then knight takes d4. The eval bar still has the position in TD's favor, but material-wise, they're even. Let's get back to f5. After pawn to f5, knight f3, knight d to c7 with a discovered attack on TD's f3 knight from the bishop and queen on that lovely a8 to h1 diagonal. Ydtd plays knight to e5 to remedy the situation, but he only exacerbated it because Warpath played bishop b5 looking to skewer the queen. Queen to c1 guards his bishop, good move from TD. Bishop takes f1, queen takes f1. Then Warpath takes the free pawn on a5. Well done. The deficit is now 1. You then get bishop to b2, queen to b4. Warpath attacks the b2 bishop. Bishop a1 moves it to safety. But then Warpath snags the free pawn on d4 with his knight. Both players are even in material. What a comeback from the underdog Warpathhunter. Ydtd is a bit perturbed. This was supposed to be an easy 2 points, but Warpath has already won the first game, and he can't let this game get away from him. So, he took a deep breath, put on his black Stetson 10-gallon hat, took a swig from his canteen as a big tumbleweed blew by, and proceeded to play pawn to h3. Pawn to f4 from Warpath, queen c4 check. Queen takes c4, knight takes c4. An equal trade of queens signals the start of the endgame. Who will prevail in game 2? Knight f5 moves it out of the scope of the bishop on a1. Bishop e5 hits the c7 knight and f4 pawn. Knight e6 defends the pawn. You then get bishop to c3. Pawn to g5, knight e5, pawn to h5, knight to d7, pawn to h4, knight f6 check, king f7, knight g4, king e8, king g1, knight e to d4, king f1, knight b5, bishop b2, knight f to d6, king e2, king to d7, and this game is starting to look drawish. TD continues with king to d3, king e6, both players are getting their kings involved in the action. Bishop h8, knight f7 attacks the bishop. Bishop b7, TD moves the bishop to safety. Then you get knight b to d6. Bishop b2, king to d5. Bishop g7, king e6. Bishop b2, knight e8. King to e4, knight e to d6 check. And king to d3. And it was after this move that the computer ended the game as a draw due to repetition. Warpathhunter earned a half a point, and Ydtd earned a half a point. Warpathhunter walked away from the matchup yelling, quote, "Ydtd has never beaten me," while Ydtd was quoted as saying, "I'm glad I could make his new year. I never knew someone could be so happy after racking up so many losses." Ydtd was referring to the 14 losses that Warpathhunter accumulated during the tournament, while conversely Ydtd rallied to come back and was a timeout away from possibly winning the Happy New Year tournament. So there it is, the 2 career daily time-controlled games that these 2 great competitors have played against one another. I sure hope both are in the same group when the Independence Day tournament begins June 30th. I'd like to see the rematch. That's going to do it for this evening. I'm Ydtd7 saying stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.